started life. If life exists elsewhere in the universe, then will we ever meet another intelligent race? Unfortunately, we have to go back to the sheer scale of the universe to realize that even our closest neighbors would take many light years to reach. Life could exist in so many forms that we would not even recognize it to be a living entity. Life might be so short-lived that it has come in and out of existence in less time than we can conceive of it. Or so vast and old that it is part of the universe itself, without us even knowing of its existence. Life could exist in different dimensions to ours, and again, we will never know of its presence. As humans, we yearn to know if we're the only intelligent life. But what would it mean if we did discover another superior life form? We consider ourselves to be sophisticated, intelligent beings, but to another more advanced race, we could appear to them as ants do to us.
At the heart of all humans is the fear of being alone. I hope there is more out there than just us, because otherwise it kind of makes us assume this big ego. And I think we have taken on this big ego of that we are all there is and we are all that will ever be.
Maybe it's stupid that we are thinking that there only is one world where we are living in, because it's infinity, so maybe it's like thousands and thousands of miles away, another world with other people on it. And we cannot reach them or see them, but maybe they're there.
In an infinite universe, other life has, of course, got to exist. Everything has got to exist. But whether there's other intelligent life out there, that becomes a much more difficult question.
I believe that there's more than that we can see now. Maybe aliens, I don't know. Because we also popped up in once with the Big Bang, so they can also be on other planets. And maybe they are hiding for us, you don't know, that they don't want to show them, so.
We certainly are not the only form of life. We just can't be. Not when you look at the vastness of what is the cosmos.
The universe is filled with stars and galaxies and supermassive black holes. The universe is filled with dark energy that we're not really sure what it is. Maybe dark energy is some type of alien that we haven't figured out what it is. And all the aliens have evolved into dark matter virtual particles, and they just fluctuate around and talk to each other and do whatever they do. And we just think it's the structure of the vacuum.
In the 1960s, an equation was formulated to try to answer the question of the probability and frequency of contactable intelligent life in our galaxy. It was called the Drake equation, and it predicted that there would be conservatively 4,000 planets with intelligent life in our galaxy alone. Since then, the estimate of this figure has increased by an amazing amount. What is our new understanding of the possibility that there is other life in our universe?
I think the prospect of life out in the universe is reasonably high, because the conditions here and the conditions out there are probably going to be quite similar. I mean, we'd expect similar chemistry, we'd expect water, etc. It's probably tricky to get exactly the right conditions to get life going, so it's unlikely to be absolutely everywhere, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is other life around in our own universe.
It would be a kind of massive freak in a way if the only place where there was life happened to be here on Earth.
If the universe is infinitely large, then one of the things that can happen appears to be life. And And so unless there's something really special about us, and there's really no physical evidence anyway that we're special, then yes, intelligent life should exist elsewhere. Life perhaps more intelligent than us should exist elsewhere.
If it really is spatially infinite, then I am certain that we're not alone. If it's spatially finite, I'm just almost certain that we're not alone. Almost certain why? Well, for all the usual reasons. Because there are plenty of planets in the Goldilocks zone. As we start to look for planetary bodies, every star we've looked at over the last decade has turned out to have planets around it. We've already discovered a few relatively close stars that have planets roughly in the Goldilocks zone, and that's just from a tiny sample, so there must be very, very many of them in our galaxy, and our galaxy is only one of an incredible number of galaxies in the bit of the universe that we can see.
So if nothing else, the sheer size of the universe makes it hard to imagine that we are the only example of intelligent life to date. And the more we improve our technology and telescopes, the more we can see. The vastness of the universe has only just started to reveal itself.
10,000 years ago, we had our Earth, we had the sun. We had other things in the sky, which appear to be stars. We didn't realize that those stars were actually new solar systems. And nowadays, we pretty much know that every star in the night sky has at least a planet, and if not more. So, if our galaxy alone has 300 billion stars, there's probably at least 300 billion planets. So there's lots of planets out there.
Even the finite universe that we see is vast. The number of stars in the sky, just in our one galaxy, is hundreds of billions.
But then we realize there's actually other galaxies that contain billions of stars, and those stars each have planets, and those planets each may or may not have life. So then we have a large thing which we call the universe, which has 175 billion galaxies with all these stars and all these planets.
In the last decade, we have found so many alien worlds, exoplanets around other stars, that we can be pretty confident that on average every star in the night sky has a planet. If you run the numbers, it's potentially 4 billion Earth-like worlds in our galaxy alone. So to say that ours is the only place that life has arisen is to take a 4 billion to 1 gamble. Now those odds seem pretty steep, and I'm not a gambler. Even if I were, I think that might be a bit of a punt, a bit of a stretch too far.
One of the variables in the Drake equation that has given the formula a lot of criticism is the number of times life starts on other planets.
I don't even have to talk about infinite for life. I think with almost certainty that we are not alone, that there is life in our galaxy.
It is a theoretical possibility that we are the only life in the universe, and we still don't know of any other life forms, no matter how crude. So is life starting on other planets a likely probability, or an incredibly rare occurrence?
Recently, we analyzed data from the Kepler Space Telescope. We analyzed stellar systems that have multiple planets, and we predicted how many planets would be in the habitable zones around other stars. So when you look up at night, you will see a star. Our results tell us that there should be, on average, about 2 planets in the habitable zone. So that implies that there's a lot of real estate, a lot of things that are vaguely like the Earth, rocky planets with some water on it. So rocky planets with water on it are everywhere in the universe. Everywhere, probably an infinite number of them. And the carbon And water is everywhere. Amino acids are everywhere. Matter of fact, they're falling from the sky right now in carbonaceous chondrites. So the ingredients for life are everywhere, and not just in the origin of our Earth, but in the origin of all the Earths, the infinite Earths that I just referred to. But now comes the question, should we expect life there? Well, there doesn't seem to be an ingredient bottleneck, but maybe there's what you call a recipe bottleneck. Maybe there had to be some very unlikely coincidence of this coming into contact with this, and then had to be sulfur spring going on here, and then you have a tide going here, and you had to have dehydrate. In other words, such a complicated recipe in that life is very, very rare. And therefore, we don't see any aliens that have conquered our galaxy.
I think life has to exist somewhere else. Now, firstly, we have to think of what life is. So, bacteria, plants, animals, those are all life. I would say it's nearly guaranteed that some form of life exists in our own solar system right now. If you look at Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, it has liquid ammonia, so it has rivers and lakes essentially of ammonia. Now, we can't live off of that, but there's no reason you can't have something else that does. With Mars and the polar ice caps, I believe that we'll find evidence that life has existed at some point in Mars well within at least a decade, if not sooner. So that's just our little very, 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 very small clump of our galaxy, which is just one of 175 billion. If you look at mathematically, it has to exist.
But how does life start? Some new ideas suggest that asteroids are like planet-seeding systems that carry the formula for life around the universe. But if that isn't the case, then chemistry evolved here on Earth in what has been termed the primordial soup. But we still don't know for certain.
It seems unlikely that we're very, very improbable. And so the best guesses is that there are many other civilizations in our galaxy. But you get back to the question, what causes life? We don't know. We don't know how life starts. But we do know that life started on our Earth fairly soon after the Earth cooled down, which suggests to you either life starts fairly easily, or else there's some divine intervention. Again, all bets are off if there's divine intervention.
Life seemed to start on Earth as soon as the Earth cooled down. This does suggest that life is relatively easy to start. But this is a sample size of 1. Until we confirm another life form, we still don't know for sure.
Life appears to have emerged here on Earth pretty much as soon as the conditions were even vaguely hospitable. So if life emerged so quickly on Earth, maybe it is simple for it to emerge elsewhere.
I actually think life might be relatively easy to kickstart because we don't know the exact mechanism by which life arose. It's very difficult to put a number. My suspicion is it might not be as hard as we're thinking, and potentially a lot of these habitable worlds could well be inhabited. Now, whether that life can communicate, whether it's intelligent life, again, it's just unknowable until we detect it.
One of the exciting things with astronomy at the moment is that we're really legitimately looking now for life on other planets. And it's something that within a decade or so, there's a very good chance that we might be able to measure. And I'm not talking about listening for radio signals from aliens. What I'm talking about is looking at the atmospheres of planets that exist around other stars and looking for traces of life in those atmospheres, things like oxygen, which we know is unstable. If you have O2, then it has to be being created by something because it's very unstable. It will rust, it will burn, and it won't hang around for long. So if you can see something like O2 in the atmosphere, then something's producing it, and that thing could be life.
Intelligent life is still one of the big questions for us to answer. As yet, all the searching we have done has only shown us what a vast, lonely place the universe appears to be. But other intelligent life could take many forms, and looking for versions of ourselves could be entirely the wrong approach.
So we'd like to know how convergent human life is, or whether we should expect humanoids on other planets. For example, if there's an infinite number of life forms out there, what is their diversity? How different will they be from us? Some biologists think that they will be completely different. There's not a remote chance in hell of finding a humanoid out there like they do every week on the Star Trek. Other biologists think that no, there are convergent features that produces humanoids and produce an elephantoid or produce a dogoid, and again and again and again. So if we go back 500 million years and then let it run again, we will find similar species again and again and again. Other biologists say, no, if you run the tape of life again, you will get very, very different things every time.
So the branching of life is very uncertain. At any point, life could take a turn from one species to another. In another world, man may never have evolved past the ape stage. So what is the likelihood of another human species on another planet?
How unlikely are we? Are we infinitely unlikely? I don't think so, but I don't know so. So the question is, how often is there life out there? There's reasons to go out and look for ET, because that would kind of prove it. On the other hand, it's worthwhile contemplating whether or not, we might be it. And so that is a question we can go out and answer by literally looking at what's going on other planets and seeing if there are signs of life, and then looking out and listening and seeing if we can hear the moral equivalence of ourselves. I don't know what the likelihood is of us finding something. The universe is very big. It's very hard for humans to even find ourselves. We've only existed for 100,000 years on a planet. And so that's like in a 24-hour day, 2 seconds in a 24-hour day. And of course, we've only been able to send radio signals and receive them for 40 or 50 years to any degree at all.
The human species is in its absolute infancy in terms of being able to be detected by other intelligent beings. The first signs that we existed were our first radio and television signals.
Wonderful new Westinghouse television set with just one hand like this. Children, of course, love that film.
Hi, Red Riding Hood. Where you going? That's about the whitest white there is. Every time I see you standing there before.
These signals have only just begun in the timescale of the universe.
The first strong radio signals that humans broadcasted, our first radio waves that have been going through space and traveling, have only reached 11,000 stars. And there are about 300 billion stars in our galaxy alone. And there's 175 billion galaxies. We haven't even touched a percent of a percent of a percent of a percent of communicating with these people. So even if they have just gotten a radio broadcast from the 1900s, they then have to return that signal back. So we're going to be waiting hundreds of years.
And this is the problem. The vast distances of the universe make it impossible to communicate with even our closest neighbors. Unless another form of communication is discovered, then our efforts to communicate are unfortunately still in the science fiction realm. This, it seems, is like the ultimate tease, as our best science tells us that the universe must be full of other intelligent beings.
The worry, of course, is that these things are so widely separated that we'll never meet these other creatures.
So it might be that the universe is infinitely big, in which case there's going to be lots of civilizations that are just far, far too far away to ever get in contact with us, that will be totally outside their light cone even.
I see no doubt that every galaxy has at least one planet with intelligent life like this right now. So it's like 175 billion right there. But we're never going to be able to talk to these people, unfortunately. It's the same physics that we use to figure out they're there tells us it's going to be too long to talk to them or travel to. Not to say that we can't figure out something new to do.
But aliens may be much more advanced than us. They may have found a way to travel faster than the speed of light. So if they exist, why have we not heard from them? Is it possible that civilizations only exist for a short time, and therefore finding an intelligent civilization in our neighborhood that is in the technological stage of its evolution is maybe just too rare, akin to finding a needle in a haystack?
So maybe life on this planet has actually emerged at the earliest point that it could in our galaxy. In which case, why haven't we heard from anybody else? Because they've only just started as well.
We've only been around for 2 million years out of 4.5 billion years on this planet. So lots of planets could have had life at different times that we've never experienced or never will experience.
The universe is almost 14 billion years old, so you could have had advanced civilizations that lived 1.3 billion years ago and have long disappeared. Maybe will disappear within a few 100,000 years, the rate we're going, maybe much less. So I think life could be all through the universe. But for a practical person, I'd ask a different question. What's the likelihood that we'll ever have contact with another form of life? That's a very different question. And that now gets us to the finite speed of light. Speed of light is not infinitely fast. So if you were to try to communicate to anyone within some distance, you wouldn't get very far. That signal would have to travel for thousands of years to have much chance of making contact with intelligent life. So you'd have to be around a very long time, maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years, as an intelligent race, advanced race, to have any chance of contacting these other forms of life. So there's two questions there. Does life exist throughout the universe? I'm sure it does. Is the life contactable? Could you make contact with it and communicate with it in a reasonable time frame? Being thousands of years, I think the chances are very, very small, if not zero.
So communication seems impossible as yet. But what about traveling to the stars to discover new worlds? One obvious drawback to this idea is that our lifespan is simply too short. A trip to Mars, our local planet, will take 4 years. A trip to our closest star will take over 150 years. So again, still seems delegated to the science fiction realm for now. But anything is possible, given enough time in an infinite universe.
We'll probably never experience another intelligent life form, unfortunately. So I believe that intelligent life form exists. Maybe it doesn't look like exactly what we think of in the movies, but maybe it does. Maybe they're identical to me and you.
So perhaps life is a common occurrence in the universe. But what about human life? How rare could it be? And if not human life, what other kinds of diverse life could exist?
How about human-like intelligence? If there's all this life elsewhere, they would surely get intelligent, build spacecrafts, and then colonize the entire galaxy. There's been plenty of time to do that. But we don't see spacecraft around here, or we don't see alien signals when we listen with the radio telescopes. Well, that might be that maybe human-like intelligence is not something that is a natural part of evolution. There are many millions of other species on this planet, and they are not evolving to become human-like. They don't want to become human any more than we want to become an elephant. Chimpanzees don't want to become humans. Humans don't want to become chimpanzees. There's a relativity there. There's not human superiority. And so humans are not some type of convergent feature of evolution. So that might be to explain why we don't see all of these. There could be life everywhere, but it wouldn't be spacefaring. It wouldn't produce radio signals. Or maybe it does, but then they get so fancy, they build all kinds of bombs, have big wars, and they kill themselves. It's the self-destruction bottleneck. So there's many scenarios you can think of that are consistent with no visible aliens and lots of habitable planets. Two billion years ago, we literally were amoebas. And we evolved over 2 billion years into what we are today. So if you imagine that something similar happened on other Earth-like planets, and they have had 2 billion more years to evolve, then they're looking at us and they're thinking, hey, we're amoebas, and we don't even understand what they are, or we no hope of talking. You don't talk to amoebas, and so maybe that's the situation we're in, and that's why we think there's no other life form in the universe.
What if life is everywhere in our universe, but it is so unrecognizable to us that we don't even realize it? Could life exist on such small quantum levels that we can never see it? Or such huge scales that, again, we could never perceive of it?
Is it possible that the universe is filled with aliens that we just don't know about because they're made out of dark energy, for example, or they communicate with neutrinos, or they communicate with radio wavelengths that are so long that we don't know about them? Well, you can easily imagine that, before 200 years ago, we didn't have radio communication, so imagine if the universe were filled of radio communicating civilizations, we wouldn't even know it until we invented the radio. This ditto for any other technology you can think of.
But what if we did have communication with another intelligent life form? This has been the stuff of science fiction for the last century, and in most cases the plots portray a fear of the unknown, and war with the aliens ensues. Is this indicative of our likely behavior? Are all aliens to be feared? Or would we take a more intelligent, scientific approach?
If there were conscious beings, then that would be such a threat to humanity, because we have this assumed ego that we are all there is. Anything that is unknown is a threat to our stable, fragile existence.
And I think it would be vastly exciting to be able to try to understand life forms that were massively different to us. We've evolved in a very particular way, but other forms of life might have done something totally different, and that would be quite exciting if we could indeed wrap our minds around it.
It's actually very difficult to get your head around what the possible implications would be of discovering and communicating with some other sort of alien life form. I think that people would be incredibly excited, and it would change people's way of thinking about their lives and their role in the sort of the universe. While humans on Earth are kind of the top predator and we pretty much do what we like, whenever we like, and there are serious consequences arising from that. But nevertheless, you've got to think we wouldn't be the top predator necessarily when we just start discovering other intelligent life forms, and it might turn out that things don't go entirely our way.
The discovery of life, intelligent life somewhere in our universe, our galaxy, would be at once the most terrifying thought and yet most satisfying and relieving discovery, simply because the burden of keeping this unique, wonderful phenomenon of life and all of its infinite variety and its possibilities is no longer ours alone to carry. An asteroid could come and wipe us out. The sun will one day eventually sterilize the Earth by expanding towards the end of its life. And right now that burden is on us, and we're doing a terrible job of it. We are not very good custodians of this. But if there were aliens out there and they were intelligent and they were able to spread between the stars, then suddenly you would think, well, I guess it's not so bad that us humans are kind of dropping the ball on this idea of trying to sustain life as a very beautifully weird and unexpected consequence of basic laws of physics and chemistry, but with infinite possibility, where the laws of physics are essentially boring and restrictive.
From a scientific point of view, I would want to know what their science is, to see how theirs compares to ours. Do they describe electromagnetic radiation the same way we do? Do they know about the existence of electrons or whatever, Is there something they're doing that we're not?
I personally think that we've already detected life elsewhere, and we just don't recognize it. And you do this by generalizing the definition of life. If you define life as a far from equilibrium dissipative structure, then you include fires and whirlpools and hurricanes as part of life. I think when we realize that, we will then consider we've already found life. But that's a little bit of a mind bend. That's more of a mind bend that most people are willing to entertain, and so they're much more happy with thinking that maybe dark matter is aliens and that they have big brains and they talk English.
What is life? This is a question that is surprisingly hard to answer. The definition of life has science divided, some going as far as suggesting the weather to be a form of life. What is the purpose of life, if there is one from an evolutionary point of view? Or is life purely a byproduct of random chemistry?
I think life is that, well, you're not dead, obviously, but I kind of think that life is that you're breathing, but I think that,
I don't know, that's a difficult question. What is life?
I believe life is about being a servant to other people. So I believe that this life on earth is just like a mini reflection of what we're going to do in heaven for eternity.
I think the meaning of life is the journey that you make of that life that gives that life meaning.
Life matters because it's an adventure. For good or bad, there's always growth in life. And if we are infinite beings, we're infinitely growing and we're infinitely trying to have experiences that we benefit from.
What is life? Life is something that we define here on Earth. It's hard to define. As a matter of fact, if you go to the biology department and ask biologists, are viruses alive? You know, half of them will say yes, and half of them will say no, and another third will say, huh. So we're not quite sure whether viruses are alive. And I take that as a warning signal, a big red warning signal saying, do we really know what life is? Because if you think viruses are alive, then they outnumber all other life forms on this planet. And if you think they're not alive, well, then you're excluding the thing that outnumbers all other life forms.
When we think about life, we think about things that have properties that are kind of like us. So we're very good at detecting kind of middle-sized living things. We see elephants and we're pretty clear that they are kind of living things like us. And then we start to learn about things that are a little bit smaller. At some point we discover there are kind of molecules and bacteria. And they're a little bit more difficult to get your head around because they're so small and they're really very different from us, but we manage it. But of course, there might be things that have lives just so radically dissimilar to us that it's hard for us to even recognize them as having lives.
I'm a scientist, so I think there was some type of molecular evolution which led to autocatalytic processes, which led to replication, which led to some type of, hey, I'm going to preserve myself, and then et cetera, Darwinian evolution. If you have that type of notion, then you have a way to at least hand-wavingly describe how non-life evolved and life emerged. Well, here's the thing. Where do you draw this boundary from non-life to life? And if this evolved naturalistically, is there a boundary that we should put there and say, oh, this is life and this is non-life? And I think the answer is no. It's a little like, you know, you have a mother and you hold your mother's hand and she holds her mother's hand. And Richard Dawkins pointed out that here's this train of mothers and going into the past. And if you go back 4 billion years, you're essentially having one bacteria hold another bacteria's hand, right? And so the question is, well, where in this chain do you cut it and say, here's a human being and here's a pre-human being? Therefore, you can't put a boundary and say everything on this side is life and everything this is non-life. That's a silly idea in the light of evolution, and I think we should get rid of it.
Now we realize that actually the fundamental reason, the point for a lot of what we see around us is simply for that animal or organism to have more offspring. That's actually it.
The meaning of life is self-replicating molecules. That's what life means. Life means molecules that manage to self-replicate and subject themselves to evolutionary processes. I suppose that's what life is. Life is an incredibly complicated chemical reaction, and the fact that you and I have the experiences that we do and have the lives that we do is all a massive byproduct of that fundamental, simple thing. Chemistry that locally creates order at the expense of globally creating more disorder.
Our brains are a byproduct of an evolutionary pressure. In other words, to get smarter meant that you would have more babies, so there were more smarter babies. That drive has led us to these wonderful, adaptable, inquiring minds that have now unlocked so many of the mysteries of our universe. That, to me, gives a point to one's life, to inquire, to understand, to explore. Those give meaning, and our interactions with our friends and our family, those give meaning. That gives the point of life. The fact that from your genes perspective, they just want to replicate, they just want their particular set to go on. Okay, that's maybe the underlying drive, and it certainly is when you're a basic organism like a bacteria, but as humans, we can do better, and we often do.
If you have an infinite number of rocky planets that are wet, you could have an infinite number of life forms. The problem is we don't know what that means. For example, no one can predict the direction of evolution. Or if you go back, rewind the tape of life on Earth, and let's say, hey, let's rewind the tape and let it play again. Would you get humans, or would you get any of the species that you see today? That's a big debate in biology. Stephen Jay Gould said, no way would you get anything remotely close to being a human. Another guy, Simon Conway Morris, says, oh yes, you get some kind of humanoid because there are valleys in this adaptation space where each species lives, and that would do it again and again and again.
Our bodies are made from billions of atoms, which are all billions of years old. So the saying we are made from stardust is literally true. At the deepest level, we are the universe in human form.
Ultimately, life emerged out of the universe. And so for me, before I go to bed most nights, I sit down, we have a hot tub, and I peer to the heavens. And I look up at the stars, I look at the Milky Way, I look at the galaxies that orbit our own, and I think of the dark spots between the stars where there are countless galaxies. And I realize just how rich the universe is and how we are one small planet around one pretty ordinary star in one reasonably ordinary galaxy in a vast sea. And the fact that we're able to go through and contemplate and realize our place and how all this order works is amazing. It is to me the great amazing story for humanity, and it intersects with, philosophy and art just trying to come to terms with it. That's how humans are going to interact with that type of experience.
In 2017, this New York Times headline shocked the world. A clandestine U.S. government program had been investigating UFOs.
Pentagon has confirmed the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program that studied UFOs, and they released video.
There's a whole fleet of them. My gosh.
For 8 years, the secret program was run by this man, Lou Elizondo.
Time and time again, we were coming up with these mystery objects, performing in a way that defies logic.
Frustrated by what he says was a cover-up, Elizondo quit and joined forces with an elite group of former government insiders.
We're going to figure out how to get to the bottom of it.
Now they have one mission: to expose what they say is the truth about UFOs.
U.S. airspace is being violated by vehicles of unknown origin with advanced capabilities.
It was raining UFOs. I put my entire career and future on the line because I believe in what I believe in.
Carl Sagan once famously said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof." He was absolutely right. But now we have the proof.
Lou Elizondo is on his way to interview a key eyewitness to one of the most stunning UFO events in recent history.
We're trying to build a case here for the jury, and so when you're building a case for the jury, there is nothing more compelling than eyewitness testimony. They were there, and by the way, they're trained observers. These are people who can think critically, and this particular pilot has never given an interview about this incident, ever.
In 2004, this Navy fighter pilot was training for deployment on board the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier. Now a high-ranking officer, this is her first on-camera interview about the incident. She wants to keep her identity hidden due to the sensitivity of what she's about to say.
I want to make sure that everybody in this room understands that her identity is to remain protected at all times. So that includes when you're writing notes on email back to executives. Hey, that was a great interview with... Don't write that. Don't put it in there. Just say the pilot.
Wingman pilot would be appropriate.
Okay, so that's the wingman pilot. Well, I still have a security clearance, so as a result, we will not be discussing anything classified at all during this interview. In fact, if at any time anything is discussed at classified, we will stop the interview right there and then.
Sure.
Elizondo is still bound by an oath of secrecy, so he hopes testimony like this will force the government to acknowledge UFOs are a threat to national security and to take action.
Because this issue is such kryptonite inside the national security establishment, he needed to figure out a way to do it so that what he's gathering could be made public. These are not crazy people that are reporting this stuff. These are the people that we entrust our security to.
Why don't we just start from the beginning?
We were operating off the coast of California in a designated military working area with our carrier strike group. We had launched to perform a practice fight against each other to rehearse our maneuvers.
On November 14th, 2004, this pilot took off from the deck of the Nimitz as the wingman to a second jet flown by her squadron commander. She soon found herself in the middle of one of the most significant UFO encounters on record.
It was daylight and
Oh, yeah.
It was in the middle of the night.
Clear blue skies, middle of the day.
Normally, fighter pilots are directed by a radar plane known as a Hawkeye.
99, take overhead, Mother Angel 7.
But the two FA-18 Super Hornets are suddenly redirected by controllers on the USS Princeton.
We were interrupted by a shipborne controller. Their tone was urgent, and their requests were unusual. This is not an exercise. This is a real-world intercept. Didn't have much experience. I thought maybe it's a drug runner or something coming up the coast of Mexico. And I thought, wow, that would be cool.
With no information about their target, as the two jets arrive at the designated location, they're confused.
My heart sank. There was something in the water. There was churning. And I went from being sort of giddy excited to thinking, oh my God, now we're on-scene commanders of a wreck. Somebody's crashed and, this aircraft is sinking.
And this is when you notice an object.
We were all clamoring to get on the radio. Do you see, in the water, what the is that?
A bizarre craft is hovering over the churning water.
What does it look like?
No windows, no flight surfaces.
So no wings at all. No wings, no...
Smooth, white, no intakes, no smoke trail. It looked like a giant Tic Tac.
Give me a rough size.
Maybe 40 feet.
Okay, 40 feet, fair enough.
Large enough to scare the shit out of me. It was so unnerving because it was so unpredictable. High G, rapid velocity, rapid acceleration. So you're wondering, how can I possibly fight this? We have no ordnance on board, unless one of us ram this thing, which the way it was maneuvering would have been impossible. So I stayed high cover.
The wingman watched from above as her commander flies directly at the strange craft. Now Elizondo is on his way to interview the other pilot in the air that day, the wingman's commander.
These are reports from military pilots. They've been in combat, and this is something that they cannot explain, and it's shaken them up to the point that they're willing to risk their professional standing by coming forward and talking about it.
Brother Dave, how are you?
Brother Lou, how you doing, man?
I'm doing better than I deserve. How you doing? Good. Boy, you live in a castle, man.
We call it a castle.
Retired U.S. Navy Commander David Fravor led the Black Aces Squadron, flying combat missions over the Middle East and Africa. He now works in the private sector as an aeronautics consultant.
Sudden and instantaneous acceleration. Commander Fravor is a very rare breed. He's one of the few folks that actually run towards danger, not away from it.
Fravor was the wingman's commanding officer that day over the Pacific.
He had that fighter instinct, so it wasn't surprising his actions on that day.
I really wanted to see what it was. I mean, if I could have joined right up on it and, got like Blue Angel close, then I probably would have done that.
As Fravor attempted to get a closer look, his wingman watched from above.
This object seemed to recognize that we were there and went from this very low altitude to maneuvering in an erratic, very rapid manner. So the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. I'm thinking I'm going to be watching a disaster here.
Most of my questions are going to be focused on the 5 interrogatives, right? The who, what, when, where, how, and why, just like we're doing a terrorism or espionage investigation.
Lou Elizondo may be the most significant U.S. official to ever claim the UFO phenomenon is real. For 2 decades, he served as a counterintelligence officer for the Department of Defense.
Lou is, in many ways, an enigma. Here was a guy who had spent decades, really, in the intelligence community.
Whether it was the Taliban, or it was Al-Qaeda, or it was ISIS, or it was Guantanamo Bay, he had to deal with all of it.
In 2009, Elizondo took over the $22 million Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, that investigated encounters between UFOs and the U.S. military.
Is this 3 reports? Was this 5 reports?
We were made aware of many, 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 many incidents. It remains a sensitive number. Those numbers are increasing on a regular and routine basis. Some of these incidents are very, very recent and very compelling.
But in 2017, he made the shocking announcement he was walking away from a 20-year military career and going public.
I had tried in vain to work within the silos of the organization, but I ultimately left the Department of Defense because of my loyalty to the department and to the secretary, not disloyalty.
For the past year, unidentified cameras have had exclusive access to Elizondo and his new team as they track down military personnel willing to go on the record with their incredible encounters with UFOs.
you are able to provide a play-by-play of what actually went down those moments that you were encountering that tic-tac.
That's correct.
So all that's going to be hugely important. I'll try to
He's meeting with one of the Navy's top former fighter pilots who came face to face with a tic-tac shaped UFO in 2004.
Flying a Navy fighter is probably one of the most spectacular jobs you could ever have in the entire world. It's like a roller coaster times 10,000. And I got to do it in some semblance of a tactical airplane for 18 years.
On November 14th, 2004, Commander David Fravor and his wingman pilot took off from the USS Nimitz, which was on maneuvers south of San Diego.
I was the commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 4-1, the Black Aces. We're flying brand new Super Hornets.
The nuclear-powered USS Nimitz was the lead vessel of a carrier strike group that included the destroyers USS Higgins and Chaffee, the attack submarine USS Louisville, and the radar-equipped missile cruiser USS Princeton.
If you asked any senior military officer, what is the crown jewel of the American military arsenal, they would say the aircraft carrier battle group. If we have to go into combat sometime quickly, it's likely going to be a carrier battle group that's going to be there first and is going to be in action first.
It was an air defense exercise, 2 good guys against 2 bad guys. Probably 70 miles, 60 miles off the coast, in the gap between San Diego and Ensenada.
Suddenly, the pilots are contacted by radar operators on the Princeton.
The Princeton control comes up and says, we're going to suspend training. We have real-world tasking.
The pilots are re-vectored to a new destination, but aren't told why.
So we start heading off to the west. The other airplane is on my left-hand side.
I was the junior pilot trying to keep up with the senior pilot and the lead aircraft.
We're looking, we don't see anything on our radars at all. And we're talking to each other trying to figure this out.
The Princeton's Aegis Spy-1 radar system is powerful enough to track an object as small as a baseball at an altitude of 80,000 feet, but the jets are flying blind.
We tried to see what was out there, which is difficult when you know what you're looking for. It's even harder when you don't know what you're looking for.
So it goes down 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, it gets all the way down. They get to a point where they can't separate us from the blip. They call it merge plot, which means you're in the same space as whatever you're looking for, and you got to start looking outside because the radar can't help you anymore.
Then far below in the water, they see what looks like a plane crash or a submerging submarine. But the weapons officer in the rear seat of Fravor's jet spots something else.
I hear, hey skipper, do you see? And as he's saying that, I notice the tic-tac. It's white, it has no wings, it has no rotors. I go, holy, what is that? And he goes, I don't know.
According to this leaked summary of the incident, contact was made here, 30 miles off the coast, 70 miles south of the US-Mexico border. At first, the strange craft stays close to the surface, moving unlike anything the pilots had ever seen.
This thing would go instantaneous from one way to another, similar to if you threw a ping pong ball against a wall. And we start to kind of orbit, because now we're going to watch this thing. We start a right-hand turn, and we're going from a clock code. The object is in the middle of the clock, and we're at 6 o'clock, and we're driving around the circle. So we get to about 9 o'clock, and it's just still doing its little erratic thing, kind of moving around this disturbance in the water. And I go, hey, I'm going to go check it out. I'm going to go down there. As we're coming down nice and easy, we get to about the 12 o'clock position, and all of a sudden it goes, boop, and it kind of turns, and now it's mirroring us, and it starts coming up. We're like, okay, now it knows we're here.
It seemed to be aware, and it seems to recognize him.
It goes from basically just almost a hover into a pretty aggressive climb up to our altitude, so there's a bit of fear because now you're out there dealing with something that you have no idea what it is. It's actually reacting to what we're doing. I'm kind of pulling nose, to where he's going to be, and he's coming up. He just rapidly accelerates beyond anything that I've ever seen. Crosses my nose, and it's gone. And I'm like, whoa.
The tic-tac appears to have vanished. But But as the jets streak towards a prearranged rendezvous location, known as the cap point, the radio chatter becomes frantic.
The controller from the Princeton comes up right as we're doing all this and says, "Hey, sir, you're not going to believe this." He goes, "But that thing is at your cap point."
According to Fravor, the Tic Tac accelerated from a standing position and flew approximately 60 miles in under a minute, as fast as 3,700 miles an hour. How did the Tic Tac know the pilot's cap point? And how did it accelerate so quickly?
You got something that can accelerate and disappear and then show up 60 miles away. Kind of in awe a little bit, because you go, whoa, we don't have that. And I'm talking, we're flying one of the premier airplanes on the planet. What was this? There was a capability out there. Don't know where it's from. Not saying it's from outer space, but not saying it's from here either.
Back on the Nimitz, the pilots tell the rest of the squadron what just happened.
The next crew is getting ready. So we're talking to them about this, and they're like, "You gotta be kidding."
They took us seriously, and the Wizzo, the guy in the back seat, said, "I'm gonna go find it."
The next jet to launch had a targeting pod with an infrared sensor and camera.
It jammed the radar, but he got a lock on it, and that's the video that you see. If that doesn't weird you out, I don't know what does.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good, Lou. How are you?
Good. Hopefully you can shed some light on a few things.
On November 14th, 2004, two pilots launched from the USS Nimitz and intercepted a UFO over the Pacific, south of San Diego.
What does it look like?
No windows, no flight surfaces. It looked like a giant Tic Tac.
They believe this video, recorded later that day by a pilot from their squadron, shows the UFO they saw. It's one of 3 Department of Defense UFO videos Lou Elizondo helped get released to the public.
When the 3 videos came out, there was this shock by the world community that, oh my gosh, these are real videos. This effort that we are embarking on, I think, is going to change the conversation forever.
Now Elizondo is meeting with 2 leading aviation experts to analyze the videos and see if they can help explain the pilot's extraordinary encounters.
What I'd like to do is go through these videos very carefully and get your thoughts on these. The provenance on these videos is very well established. They are genuine DoD military videos.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Chris Cook is a Top Gun pilot who spent a career flying the military's most sophisticated fighter jets. Ross Amer flew commercial aircraft for more than 4 decades and works as a consultant for the National Transportation Safety Board. It's the first time the 3 men have spoken.
So the first video I'm going to show you this afternoon was taken in the 2004 timeframe.
The first video shows the Tic Tac shaped object seen by the Nimitz pilots, captured by an F-18's infrared camera.
If you look at it out of context, you think, oh, this is just another UFO video. But from my perspective, he absolutely captured what we saw earlier in the day.
The grainy 90-second video shows the Tic Tac flying slowly, then zipping away at what appears to be a high rate of speed.
The altitude is 20,000 feet. We're in the TV mode now, so it's visual.
The display's indicators are familiar to the pilots, but the image on screen is confusing.
It doesn't appear to have any characteristics of any normal aircraft that I've witnessed flying.
The experts wonder how the craft is staying airborne without wings.
No flight control surfaces. I don't see that.
Does not look like an aircraft to me.
But in these images of a fighter jet, also shot with an infrared camera, the heat from the engine is clearly visible.
Everything we know about propulsion systems is they create an intense amount of heat. So if it was a conventional type aircraft, you would most definitely see some type of an IR signature plume behind the airplane.
If you want to defy Earth's gravitational force, the way to do it is with either a propeller to mechanically displace air, jet engine to compress air and to create an equal and opposite reaction, or a chemical explosion like a missile or a rocket. Each one of those has a tall tale signature. Yet here are things that are able to seemingly effortlessly defy Earth's gravitational force and maneuver in ways that are complete contrary to anything that we would presume should be able to fly.
The ability to fly without wings or an engine is one of 5 distinct characteristics Elizondo's Pentagon team discovered. He calls them the observables and considers them the program's breakthrough discovery. Anti-gravity, the ability to fly without apparent means of propulsion or lift. Instantaneous acceleration, the ability to reach a high rate of speed in a short amount of time. Hypersonic velocity, speeds over 3,700 miles per hour, 5 times the speed of sound. Low observability, the capacity to cloak or conceal. Transmedium travel, the ability to move through space, air, and water.
Any one of these, mind you, would be an absolute strategic game changer for any foreign adversary to have. And yet, here we have things doing all 5.
Nobody that I know is aware of some breakthrough that we've made in technology that could allow aircraft to do what these reportedly are doing.
Brian Bender is one of the reporters who broke the story of the Pentagon's secret UFO program.
These aircraft seem to defy all of the known aerodynamic properties that we're familiar with. So let's let the film keep rolling.
The object the Navy pilot is tracking suddenly seems to get bigger.
So what just happened there? What is he doing? Is he trying to
changing the zoom.
The object then appears to accelerate rapidly, disappearing off screen.
That's a significant rate of acceleration in a horizontal plane off to the left. That's very fast.
The object appears to perform a similar maneuver to what the pilots witnessed.
We're all amazed at how fast this thing just took off and disappeared.
Instantaneous acceleration at this rate would produce a force of gravity, or G-force, so extreme it would crush a human being.
I have no idea what that thing is, and it's not acting like a
aircraft.
It's not acting like anything I've ever seen.
Yeah.
If there are vehicles out there, aircraft that are doing things aerodynamically that we've never even thought of, then I think we potentially could have real trouble down the road.
There was another F-18 that was flying with Commander Dave Fravor that day, and for the first time, frankly, ever, we were able to talk to that individual. There was some frustration. Frankly, there was a little bit of fear.
Lou Elizondo is briefing his team on new information he's learned about the USS Nimitz incident. This elite group of former government insiders was formed in 2017, bound by their conviction that the craft in these videos must be investigated.
We can make a difference and do things because we have the connections and the network, and if we can continue to establish credibility with people in the Hill and the executive branch, we might be able to take this the next step.
Chris Mellon served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. Steve Justice was a top aviation engineer at Lockheed Martin's legendary Skunk Works. Al Puthoff was a scientist for the CIA.
If you were trying to come up with the A-team of former high-level government officials who would come forward on this issue, you can't really think of a better team. Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, these are guys who still have security clearances, still have networks in Washington, still are in the business, if you will.
Chris Mellon, who's put his entire family's reputation on the line to do this. Steve Justice left a very lucrative job at Lockheed Skunk Works to do this.
But by far the most unlikely member of Elizondo's new team is the man who brought them all together.
The last show I played was in front of 100,000 people. The lights and the pyrotechnics and all that stuff was going on right behind me. And then they wonder why I'm not doing that now.
So back it up, introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name is Tom DeLong. A lot of people know me from my band Blink-182. I started that band when I was 16. But I got to that point where my daughter was 2 years old and I was gone for 2 years straight, and I really, really needed a break. The only other thing I was ever interested in was UFOs.
DeLong walked away from stardom and dedicated himself to disclosing what he believes is the truth about UFOs.
I needed to get into the government, and I needed to find the people that deal with this subject and let them know what I'm thinking of doing.
DeLong says he was able to secure a meeting with a high-level aerospace executive with deep connections to the military.
All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I had an opening. And I just go, I am not naive to this subject. I understand the national security implications of this subject, but I am asking for your help because I need guidance. I just need somebody to help me and give me advice. And he leans back and he goes, okay. That's when my life changed completely.
Soon, DeLong was covertly communicating with powerful people, including General William McCaslin, the former head of a billion-dollar Air Force research lab, and John Podesta, the former presidential advisor who once said his biggest regret in the White House was not releasing the government's UFO files.
Tom called me out of the blue, sort of, who is this fellow and why is he calling me? And we began to chat, and I began to chat with some of the other people he was talking to, and he clearly was establishing a network of people who had serious credentials. There are people like me who see this as an incredible mystery and enigma that needs to be resolved.
DeLong says they were all part of an elite group of high-ranking officials dedicated to UFO disclosure, but they wanted to remain in the shadows.
Do you think there's a way over time that we can open up some of these discussions, declassify material?
We ought to be serious about investigating what's going on. Other countries have done that. Other countries have declassified the information they've had.
He's one of the most tenacious individuals I've ever met. He got to the highest levels of the U.S. government, to include Podesta.
Hello, South LA!
But in October 2016, on the eve of the heated presidential election, DeLong was thrust into a media storm.
WikiLeaks released more emails.
The result, it appears, of massive hacks into the National Democratic Committee, private email account of Clinton campaign chair John Podesta, and who knows who else.
DeLong's communications with John Podesta and others were stolen by Russian hackers and published online by WikiLeaks.
The one rule they had is we will help you, but don't go out and tell anybody who we are. That's the only rule.
Overnight, DeLong found himself at the center of the decades-old debate about UFOs.
I think a lot of people thought that Tom DeLong was being used, was being used as a tool. They'll tell him some stuff that's not true, and it'll be a diversion, and we'll fool the Russians or fool the Chinese.
George Knapp is an investigative journalist who has reported extensively about UFOs.
I'm just going to ask you point blank, is Tom DeLong being controlled by a small group of powerful insiders?
No. No, I think Tom DeLong has plotted out his own course. He's got some really good advisors who are not part of the government. All of these events that have happened are because Tom DeLong used shoe leather, knocked on doors, made phone calls. What Tom has started in the last year is unprecedented, I think, in the history of the study of this field.
By the fall of 2017, DeLong had assembled his team.
Thanks for joining us live today.
Then he learned the head of the Pentagon's secret UFO program had resigned in protest and wanted to join forces.
It was Luis Elizondo. It was the guy that I wasn't supposed to know his name ever. It was the guy that worked at the office of the Director of National Intelligence. And they said, but there's one other thing. There's the first 3 videos of UFOs are going to be declassified for the first time in U.S. history.
Chris Mellon understands what it means for America to be under attack. On 9/11, he was one of the highest-ranking officials inside the Pentagon.
I have lived through and survived intelligence failures, including the attack on the Pentagon. This was a group of 20 guys with no special skills or capabilities or technology, and they were able to wreak massive havoc on our country. To me, what is most interesting about this case, most pilots don't report these kinds of incidents, or people are bringing information in cases does, which is a sign that, we're establishing some credibility and some presence.
Now Mellon's out of government, part of an elite team of investigators, raising the alarm about what they see as another potential aerial threat.
What is really motivating me right now is the Nimitz case. We had multiple naval aviators, and what they saw in broad daylight over an extended period of time was corroborated by the most sophisticated sensor systems, air defense systems on Earth. Any reasonable person would have to conclude defies present understanding of what aircraft are capable of doing. It was clearly something beyond the pale.
Chris Mellon is an interesting character. He's never been very public. His jobs have sort of demanded him to work behind the curtain.
Mellon hails from one of America's richest and most powerful families. The Mellons made fortunes in oil, aluminum, and banking, and wielded power for generations. But Chris Mellon found his calling in intelligence, overseeing the budgets for some of America's most secret programs.
I was at the Senate Armed Services Committee, and a report emerged indicating the United States had lost a nuclear weapon. So they sent me to try to find out what happened to the missing nuke warhead.
Back when I was a junior person in the Department of Defense, we all knew who Christopher Mellon was. This was a man who had all the secrets.
I was at Area 51 talking to some guys there, working some programs, and I said, "Do you guys ever see anything really strange?" I was almost embarrassed to even ask about it because of the stigma surrounding the topic. And much to my surprise, these guys said, "Yeah, we've seen some really strange stuff here at night."
The deeper Mellon looked into the controversial subject, the more he began to question why the government was doing nothing about it.
Here's a guy who presumably would know or be able to find out if these sightings were related to some very secret military program that these Nimitz pilots, for example, were not aware of. And clearly, Chris doesn't seem to think that these instances were military aircraft being tested in secret. He feels so strongly about it that he came out of the shadows when it's not really in his DNA to do that.
Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo weren't the only officials within the government concerned about a potential threat. The Pentagon's secret UFO unit, ATIP, was established by a small group of senators, including former astronaut John Glenn, World War II veterans Daniel Inouye and Ted Stevens, and former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid.
It's amazing that an individual who worked at such a high level for so long as the Majority Leader of the United States Senate would choose this among all of the myriad of issues that he engaged on, with all of the challenges confronting our country today. And this is one that he chooses in the twilight of his career to try to carry forward.
In 2009, Reid sent this letter to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, arguing America needed to study the potentially groundbreaking technology behind these bizarre craft before it got into the hands of our enemies. Reid requested a small unit with one of the highest levels of secrecy. It was the birth of ATIP.
He's making that case, and that the strategic implications are so great that we have to accord it special protection.
This wasn't the first time the U.S. government studied UFOs. The Air Force launched Project Blue Book in 1952, when a rash of UFO sightings put the nation on edge.
This is David Brinkley in the radar room at Washington National Airport. On these radar screens last Saturday, they saw something strange and unusual and, at the moment, unexplainable. It was not an airplane. It was not a cloud. Nobody knows what it was.
For the next 17 years, the Air Force studied over 12,000 UFO sightings and found 701 cases that couldn't be explained. But they concluded the incidents posed no national security threat and officially shut Project Blue Book down in 1969.
It wasn't lack of compelling information, it was actually the result of compelling information. Ultimately, they determined that they needed to tamp down the concern, the public concern, in part because during the Cold War, This could create some kind of hysteria and overwhelm our air defense systems. So the government behind the scenes concluded that they needed to discredit this phenomenon.
Mellon claims Project Blue Book created a stigma around UFOs that continues to this day inside the military.
I talked to people in the Pentagon who had relayed that they were concerned it was going to make the Defense Intelligence Agency look bad. They were more concerned about the optics of it.
I wonder if at some point this is going to go down as a historical document where people are going to look back and say, you know, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, that was heroic.
I was never formally debriefed, and I wasn't taken seriously for years.
For over a decade, the accounts of two Navy fighter pilots of an encounter with an unidentified craft south of San Diego were dismissed by the U.S. Navy.
If I had been a single-seat pilot and I had encountered it by myself, I probably wouldn't have said anything. I wouldn't want to risk my security clearance. I wouldn't want to risk people thinking I was a freak or crazy.
You actually get 4 people that are eyewitnesses to the performance of this thing, and then nothing gets done. So the frustration that comes out of that is why?
It was not only ridicule, but then the intel people didn't seem to be interested in their story. It was the worst of both worlds.
For months, Lou Elizondo and former Assistant Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence Chris Mellon had been working behind the scenes to organize a meeting between the 2 pilots and members of Congress.
If people see the evidence, they'll understand and they'll find it compelling. Sometimes it's only by bringing the information public and bringing it to the attention of Congress that you get action.
Elizondo is driving across the country when one of the pilots, retired Navy Commander David Fravor, calls to tell him the unprecedented meeting has just taken place.
Fantastic. And they asked you some hard, good questions? On the record, oh my God, phenomenal.
Fravor tells Elizondo that he and his wingman pilot met in secret with members of Congress responsible for national security.
Holy dude.
The senators don't want their names revealed because of the sensitivity of the issue. The press was not informed, and the meeting is not found on any official schedule.
Do you feel positive that it was well received? Well, congratulations. You just made history, brother. Again. For the first time in history, U.S. senators were briefed for the record on UFOs affecting U.S. military aircraft and operations.
For Elizondo, this meeting is the first step in an effort to wake lawmakers up to a serious threat to national security.
How does the story end?
I have no idea who it was or what it was. Maybe it's Elon Musk or somebody out there coming up with some, disruptive technology that's going to change our lives, like an iPhone. If you'd shown me an iPhone when I was in high school, I would have thought it was voodoo magic. I hope it ends peacefully.
You have to ask yourself, is it E.T. or is it Independence Day? What's the intent? And right now, we don't know.
I promise I will try not to yammer on too long. I don't think necessarily disclosure is an event. I think it's a process. And I think that process began. We trust the American people to know that there are certain countries that have nuclear warheads pointed at New York and Los Angeles that could wipe out millions of people in an instant. And yet we don't trust the American people to know that there's something in our airspace that we don't know what it is. There's a lot more I don't know than I do know, but that's okay. That's why we have to continue to seek to find the answers and collect the data, because ultimately, the data will speak for itself.
I think the public is closer to understanding the UFO mystery than at any time in my lifetime. It's astonishing. And yeah, it's a little bit scary.
What's worst case scenario?
Well,
Have you thought about it?
I would tell you already, it's too late, because it's here. So we have a choice. We can live with our heads buried in the sand and hope it goes away, or we can take our head out of the sand and try to figure out how it works. But it doesn't really care what we think in this room, because it's here.
This this season on Unidentified.
There's a whole fleet of them. Oh my gosh.
Never forget those voices.
You know those
I
voices?
those guys, yeah.
Elizondo's mission to track down more eyewitnesses
If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I don't know if I would have believed it either.
True. It was raining UFOs.
leads him to reveal a disturbing pattern.
They disappeared down off the coast. I can tell you the Latin long.
I saw a little sphere. Suddenly, it moved. Like that. Fast.
And to expose an even larger threat.
These UFOs had an intense interest in anything nuclear.
What are they, and where are they from?
The beams went down into the weapons storage area, and I'm thinking, oh my God.
Now these objects have a global presence.
A helicopter arrived, and they requested all the data reporting.
They didn't want the world to know, which is scary. You don't know what else they're covering up.
Unidentified vehicles are operating at will in restricted airspace, just minutes from the nation's capital.
Thousands of people experience unidentified flying objects. It's time to look into it. You can't ignore facts.
Tonight on Unidentified.
Before I knew it, I had these objects raining out of the sky. It was raining UFOs.
It wasn't an event. It was events.
A helicopter arrived. They requested all the data reporting.
There's things right off Catalina that the U.S. military continue to encounter. We don't know what they are. We have an obligation to try to figure it out.
We are getting our asses kicked. If these things are hostile, then we're screwed.
The Pentagon has confirmed the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program that studied UFOs, and they released video.
There's a whole fleet of them. Oh my gosh.
For 8 years, Lou Elizondo ran a secret UFO program for the U.S. military. But in 2017, he quit in protest.
I put my entire future on the line because I believe in what I believe in.
Now he's joined an elite group of former government insiders. Their mission: reveal what they say is the truth about UFOs.
U.S. airspace is being violated by vehicles of unknown origin with advanced capabilities.
It's rotating.
This is real, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Get your government to do what it's supposed to do. Find out what this is. Wake up. This is real. Wake up. The gentleman we're going to talk to today, his name is Kevin Day. He was on board the USS Princeton the day of the Nimitz incident. And he's now coming forward to say, I saw something, I experienced something, I witnessed something that was remarkable.
It's going to be really interesting if he corroborates some of the pilot's testimony.
Kevin Day is the very first person who noticed these anomalous things in the sky. The further away we got from the city and the more remote it became, the more I realized that this is a person who decided to get away. And get away for a long time.
Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLonge are on their way to interview a third military eyewitness to an alleged mass UFO sighting. A Navy veteran who says he has critical new information about the event.
Lou.
Mr. Day, sir.
You must be Lou.
I am Lou. How are you, sir?
Come on in, guys.
Thanks. This is Tom.
How are you, bud? I'm Tom.
Hi, Tom. Nice to meet you,
Nice to
man.
meet you as well.
I didn't know you were at the Top Gun course.
Yeah, the air controllers go through school with the pilots, getting them to the fight and back without getting shot down.
Kevin Day was the chief radar specialist on the USS Princeton.
Kevin Day was a senior enlisted guy in the Navy, and you do not get the rank he got to unless you're very, very good. The intent of this interview is to get your perspectives. Of course, we don't want to do it at the sacrifice of national security. So I won't ask you anything classified. I won't ask you to provide any information that's classified or sensitive.
You bet.
So from beginning to end, tell me your story.
I guess is the best way to jump in. We were off the coast of San Diego, Nimitz strike group, getting ready to go on deployment.
The Princeton was part of the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group on a training mission southwest of San Diego. When Kevin Day dispatched 2 pilots to intercept an unidentified craft, he picked up on radar.
It didn't fly like an aircraft.
It's about 40 feet long. It's white. It has no wings. It has no rotors. It has no control surfaces. It's literally, think of a white Tic Tac.
This image of the Tic Tac shaped object was captured by an F-18's weapon systems camera.
It was so unnerving because it was so unpredictable.
But the story began 4 days earlier, when Kevin Day says he started seeing strange tracks on his radar.
Right around the evening of the 10th of November, all these contacts were popping up in my radar coverage right off Catalina Island up by Los Angeles. At first, there was like 10 or 12 objects. Watching them on display was like watching the snowfall in the sky.
Day says the ship's system tracked the unidentified objects dropping down from the upper atmosphere and then flying south in what appeared to be an organized formation at an altitude of 28,000 feet.
The relative position didn't change from each other. They were going real slow, 28,000 feet at 100 knots, which is extremely weird. Usually things that high don't travel that slowly because they'll fall out of the sky.
Do me a favor. On this piece of paper, pretend this is the screen, okay?
Okay, sure.
Tell me what you're seeing.
So you got the Carrier, you got the Princeton, the Chafee, and the Higgins. And up here by Catalina Island, I see these objects like this. Look kind of just like that. And they're all going 100 knots, tracking to the south. If you added them all up, there was well over 100 contacts.
According to Kevin Day, an entire fleet of UFOs was flying unimpeded through the Navy's exercise warning area off the West Coast. The Princeton was equipped with the military's most sophisticated radar system. Known as the Aegis Spy-1, it provides a 3D, 360-degree view of the entire battle space.
The USS Princeton, if you will, is the eyes and the ears for the battle group.
The Spy-1 can simultaneously track hundreds of air contacts and can identify virtually anything that flies.
And eliminated the fact that they could have been friendly aircraft of some kind or enemy aircraft of some kind. Nothing really fit.
There's no recognized signature that you're picking up. It's becoming evident that these things are really UFOs. They are unidentified flying objects.
I didn't have a better word for it.
Right.
I was just chomping at the bit. I just wanted to intercept these things. So Captain J.L. Smith comes down to combat, and I said, "Sir, I think we should intercept these things." I reached out and I hooked one of them on the large screen display, but all of a sudden this object drops 28,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean, and I figured it out later as a 0.78 seconds.
If Kevin Day's calculations are correct, the object he saw would have been moving at the astounding speed of 24,000 miles per hour, over 30 times the speed of sound.
99, take overhead, Mother Angel 7.
So the captain said, "Yeah, let's intercept one," and I was like, "Hell yeah."
After tracking the strange objects for days, on November 14th, 2004, the Princeton's radar room finally took control.
We grabbed one of the flights that was doing a check flight off the carrier. It just happened to be Commander Fravor's flight.
The Princeton control comes up and says, "Hey, Fast Eagle 110, this is Poison. We're going to suspend training. We have real-world tasking."
Commander David Fravor and his wingman pilot had been on a training run when they received the order to intercept.
They got into an area what we call merge plot, where the pilot is in the visual arena with whatever they're intercepting.
It was so unpredictable. High G, rapid velocity, rapid acceleration. So you're wondering, how can I possibly fight this?
And all of a sudden, over radio, we hear, oh my God, I'm engaged, I'm engaged."
I'm thinking I'm going to be watching a disaster here.
Day says he watched as the Tic Tac escaped the fighter jets, climbing with an extraordinary burst of acceleration.
Right back up to 28,000 feet.
Day says the dramatic encounter was just the beginning.
At that point, we got a bunch of other aircraft that are launching off the carrier, and all these other intercepts are happening.
One of the jets was able to capture this video that would go on to make headlines around the world.
Before I knew it, I had these objects raining out of the sky. Choo, 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 choo. It was raining UFOs. And all these other intercepts are happening. And before I knew it, I had these objects raining out of the sky. Choo, 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 choo. It was raining UFOs.
For 8 years, Lou Elizondo ran the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, a secret Pentagon unit that investigated UFOs. Now he's working with a team of former government insiders assembled by Tom DeLonge. Their mission, reveal what they say is the truth about UFOs. They're starting with the Nimitz incident, the full story of which has never been told, until now.
I'm telling you, it was the most humbling experience of my life.
In his first on-camera interview, this former Navy radar specialist claims he watched an entire fleet of Tic Tac-shaped UFOs evade Navy F-18s.
Not only do you have the pilots seeing this Tic Tac, but you have another eyewitness that's 20 miles away on another ship. You've got to ask yourself, are the radars being spoofed and are the cameras faulty?
Every time these things would get in the visual arena, they would fall out of the sky. Wait till the interceptor had left and they'd pop right back up to 28,000 feet, right back where they were, and continue going 100 knots. It was as if they wanted to be left alone.
Later on shore, Kevin Day says he spoke with Commander David Fravor, a pilot who went head-to-head with the Tic Tac.
And I was asking him, oh, what the hell, man? What happened? He said, Mako, I gotta tell you, that thing kicked my ass. And that kind of spurred me. I said, okay, that's enough. I'm gonna write an after-action report. I gotta document this.
But when Day says he tried to document what happened, he searched the ship's computers for the radar data and communication recordings.
Well, strangely enough, all the comms were gone. All of our external communications for that whole intercept were gone, which is supposed to be impossible. So either someone took the old disk and replaced it, or somehow it was actually erased.
But the time code is there.
Yeah.
But the recordings were not.
Right.
So I'm trying to understand how. Yeah, that's really.
Wow.
I don't have a good answer. I don't know.
Day claims the files were gone, but he was able to write down a critical piece of information.
These things were going somewhere. They fell off my radar envelope down off the coast of Baja, California.
Okay.
There's a little group of islands down off the coast, and right there they disappeared several hundred miles.
Did they all go into that same Latin long down
They all went to the same spot. I could tell you the Latin long.
The geographic coordinates where Day says the Tic Tacs disappeared off his radar lead here, 180 miles south of San Diego, off the Mexican coast.
Kevin Day adds a layer of expertise that we didn't have before. With those electronic eyes, Kevin Day can see things that the naked eye cannot. And he adds an entirely new dimension to this investigation. Did the captain seem concerned or agitated, or what was his reaction?
I can only guess what he was thinking, but he didn't seem concerned at all. I think he was trying to resist the idea that there were UFOs.
Why? Let me ask you, why does anybody in the Navy want to resist the idea of UFOs?
Because they don't want to get scoffed at. They want to get made fun of, especially for a guy trying to make admiral, you know?
Sure. There's a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of feelings behind this issue, and there's a lot of stigma. But it was this guy, Kevin Day, who had the courage to come forward and say, boss, I don't know what these are. Let's figure this out.
You know, I was looking around, I was like, you know, all the years, all the money, and all the expertise, and all the talent, everyone around me in this whole strike group, and there's nothing we can do. If these things are hostile, then we're screwed.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Outstanding, and I mean it sincerely. It's been an honor and pleasure. One thing is to know that there was somebody looking at a radar scope. Another thing is to talk to the guy who went to the Top Gun school, and he's telling you, we don't know what these things are.
That absolutely blew my mind. And he's the one that called for the intercept.
Yeah, and now you know what else too? He's got the lat logs he provided us on where these things may have went. We don't know if they've kind of just fell off the radar or if there's something there, but either way, we got to check it out.
Back in Southern California, Elizondo is updating the team on his extraordinary interview with Kevin Day.
Tom and I went to go visit an individual who was in the radar room at the time of the Tic Tac event. He was the senior most individual responsible for that radar. So here's the bottom line. It wasn't an event, it was events. And it occurred over a longer period of time than we thought.
The other thing that is really interesting is he says there's data somewhere at some other server, and he goes, find that data.
Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Chris Mellon, has tried to track down the records from the Nimitz fleet for that week.
One of the frustrating but very intriguing things about this is that when I suggested to someone on the Hill that they try to obtain the deck logs for the Princeton for that date, the National Archives said the Princeton logs for that date are missing. Those deck logs should be there, and we know officially now that they're not, and it's not due to classification.
But do you
Which is unfortunate, because if they had been there, that might be another way to corroborate some of these reports. What I would like to do in this case is be able to corroborate this with another witness from
Absolutely.
the radar room. I think it would be much to our advantage to find a second source.
With the deck logs allegedly missing, Kevin Day's testimony may hold the key to unlocking a larger mystery, one Elizondo was unable to answer when he was at the Pentagon. Why were these strange craft appearing just off the West Coast? And where exactly were they heading? It takes weeks, but Elizondo is able to find another witness from the USS Princeton, a radar technician who served with Kevin Day.
There was nothing usual about all this, man. I mean, there was nothing normal about the whole situation.
Wow. Let me ask you something. Would you be available to talk to you in person?
Yeah.
My hope is that we'll make a serious, credible effort to acquire and analyze data which can tell us whether this UFO issue actually does involve some other civilization or reveals a breakthrough on the part of adversaries, or even potentially an ally. It's just sort of inexcusable to me that we don't make the small amount of effort required to answer such a profound question. Hey, Gary.
Hey.
Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Chris Mellon, is meeting the fourth Navy eyewitness from the USS Nimitz UFO encounter.
The more eyewitnesses you can have, the better. We were successful in setting up a meeting with this individual. And so Chris Mellon, being a former, very senior person in the Department of Defense, I knew he would have some really good perspectives.
Hope you like coffee strong.
Oh, thanks so much.
Gary Voorhees was a technician on board